Hi. How much listening have you done today already? I don't know what time of the day you might be listening to this or watching this YouTube video, but you've probably had maybe a busy morning or a busy day, or maybe it's a Monday and you just came off of a busy weekend. But how much actual listening have you been doing? How much of your time has been thinking and not listening? How much of your time has been in your own brain, and while people are doing that, or where people are sitting across from you talking and asking you questions, and you quickly answer their questions so they'll trundle off? Let me share with you a small change that you can make right away that makes a great big difference. Because you've got a challenging job, and if we don't know how to do this simple skill about how to listen to understand rather than listen to argue, then of course we make our job harder than it needs to be. So we have a group of leaders that we get to meet with from time to time, and at this point in time we're going through meeting with them about once a month and trying to help them think through how they can manage some of the more profound challenges that they've all got together as a group. We're having quite a bit of fun with them. Last time, a few days ago, we got a chance to sit down around a table. Of course, there was some bourbon and there was some gin and there was some cigars, and we're having a great time. And we knew we were going to get together again. So I said, as a result of listening to a bunch of their conversation about conflicts that they were having, I suggested that what they might want to try over the next few days or weeks is to actually find somebody with whom they deeply disagreed. Fundamentally disagreed about something. Probably not something so big like a worldview, but something smaller like a strategy. And then go meet with that person and see if you could listen carefully, interview him or her, and try to understand them and not try to change their mind. Try to understand why they think the way they think, where their position came from, how much it matters to them, without ever once trying to change their mind. In fact, set out with a goal, I assigned this to them, to go change your own mind about that person. Well, when I suggested doing this, everyone could think of somebody with whom they fundamentally disagreed about something, but they were not willing to go do it. I pushed a little bit, said, let's go try it. Come on, let's just go try it. And so this was a few days ago we met, perhaps last week. Within a few days, I heard back from all 10 of them. And only 2 of them were actually able to do it. Everyone tried, but everyone except for 2 failed. And the common reason why they said to me in email and phone calls that they failed was that they simply couldn't resist trying to change that person's mind because the person was fundamentally wrong. Isn't that fun? That's a fun way to think. Of course, you may actually have that same kind of fascinating challenge. Let's unpack this a little bit for you, and let's end up in a few minutes by sharing with you how to listen so you truly understand, and how to spot when you're listening to argue, either out loud or argue in your mind. When you're listening to somebody and disagree with them, or you think they're wrong, or they're missing something, or they're hiding something, you'll have this inner narrator that turns on. And you may ask questions, but it'll be questions like, how do you live with yourself? Things like that. You just won't say them out loud. Let's unpack this just a little bit. Put yourself in a situation. Imagine yourself in a situation. It won't be difficult for you to do because this happens all the time as a leader or a manager or a supervisor or somebody who's influencing other people. Imagine yourself in a situation with someone with whom you disagree. Now, it doesn't have to be something big like a fundamental disagreement, which is the assignment I gave to those other folks, but something where you disagree about something that matters. Imagine yourself in that kind of situation. When disagreements happen, typically our survival brain, we've got 3 kind of systems is a way I like to think about it. System 0 is our survival brain, which keeps us alive and perceives everything accurately or inaccurately as a threat or a reward, and then responds quickly accordingly. If it's a threat, we want to get away from it. If it's a reward, we want to go toward it. And that survival brain then has atop of it kind of a goal brain, has on top of it a habit brain, not a goal brain. That's what we call system 1 in our brain. System 2 in our brain, so there's System 0, survival, System 1, which is our habit brain, and System 2, which we call our focused executive region, goal-oriented brain. Those three systems together are operating all the time. Now, it's really quite fascinating to watch what happens when someone interacts with you and they disagree with you. Your survival brain will probably lead the way, and it will perceive very quickly and on a low level that disagreement as a threat to your status, for example, or to your autonomy, or to other things. And when it's a threat, you will change how you listen. That's our survival brain. That's always working, always working, always working. So if you want to stop listening to this right now and go out and practice this, you could. You could just practice listening to your own survival brain when people interact with you who disagree with you. Notice you'll have a really rapid response to that person. And you'll feel it more than think it, and it's likely it'll be a subtle and rapid response commensurate with the perceived threat in their disagreement. You've got to pay attention to that because that's a fundamental skill in learning how to listen. If you and I are unaware that that's even going on, we will skip way over that first step in learning how to listen well in conflict. If we're not in conflict, by the way, it's really easy to listen. If we're interested and not in conflict and the person's not boring, it's really easy to listen to people. But people who disagree with us about things that matter to us and are boring, wow, now that's quite the cocktail. Makes it hard to listen to them. So we have, and here's another idea, real quick I'll share with you. We have what some have called a default mode network in our brain. It's very important. I'm going to slow it down to activate your default mode network. Our default mode network, by definition, is the place where our brain defaults when we're not concentrating on something and using any discipline or any act of will or any conscious thought. Default mode. We go into default mode. Our brain is highly active, by the way. When we do scans, we can find out the brain regions are very, very active when we're in this default mode network in our brain. What we're doing in the default mode is we're daydreaming, or we're wondering, or we're letting our mind wander. We're not focusing, we're not concentrating, we're not trying to stay on target at all. We're just kind of letting our mind veg out, or space, or float around. And it's incredibly active when that occurs. One thing to know about the default mode network is that the default mode network has a big stage. Big stage. Lots of things going on, but at the center of that stage is always me. Now, put that aside, think about that for just a second, because we're going to weave that right back in. When we go into our default mode network, our brain is very, very active, but not the parts of our brain where we're using our willpower, where we are functioning using any kind of self-control or discipline at all. It's just freewheeling, all right? It's very good for us when we do that, but it is counterproductive when we are trying to listen to somebody and genuinely understand them. You've had this happen. Maybe it's even happened now in the 7.5 or 8 minutes of this video where I've been talking to you at roughly the same tone and pace, and your mind wandered. And then it came back. Maybe it came back right now. Where'd it go? It went into that default mode, that kind of mode. But it's very, very active. It just wasn't very focused, and it wasn't trying to do anything on purpose. Just let it go, okay? That's the default mode network. So we are, because of the default mode network, because of the survival brain, threat, reward, or nothing, because of those two put together, we are a whole lot better at being in our own heads and in our own world, default mode network, than in other people's views, perspectives, and opinions and world. It's very difficult. You ever had somebody start to tell a story, or let's make it this way. Have you ever tried to tell a story about something, or an experience, a brief experience about anything? You got a great ice cream cone, and somebody interjects with you and tells you their story where they got a better ice cream cone or a worse ice cream cone from a similar place? What happened there? They're probably a one-upper, right? But if that's not what's going on, they are probably in default mode. The moment you start telling a story about your favorite ice cream, they put that story in their default mode network and they make it all about themselves without any effort at all, highly active. Chocolate chip mint. I love chocolate chip mint ice cream. But when I start talking about chocolate chip mint ice cream, Donnie has a reaction to chocolate chip mint ice cream, right, Donnie?
Yeah, I hate it.
He hates chocolate chip mint ice cream. Of course, he's not developed the finer palate that comes with understanding the sophisticated things of life, right? So what he's done when I say to him, I like chocolate chip mint, he immediately goes into his default mode network and says, well, I don't like chocolate chip mint. This is very natural. We all do this. It's really fascinating kind of stuff. All right. Since we're better at being in our own default mode, we're better at making things about ourselves. And because we're always looking for threats or rewards, we prefer to be in our own headspace than to get into someone else's headspace and world and perspectives. It's harder for us to do it. But if you and I are going to be really effective leaders and managers and supervisors and influencers of people, we want to get a little bit better at listening to people in a very specific way. There are a couple of ways that we can listen to people. We can listen to argue, or we can listen to understand. If we listen to argue, we start with an assumption that the person we're listening to, the person we're engaging with, is wrong and they have something to learn. And I'm here, gift of God, to help them learn that something. That's where we start. We listen looking for weaknesses. We're looking for threats. Our default mode and our survival brain are on high alert while they're talking. And we're listening typically, those of us who are very energetic, waiting to interject. And as soon as they suck air, we interject. Our memory, by the way, when we're listening to argue, is not very good when we're listening to argue. It's very, very selective and very efficient at that. It's only going to remember a few things. And our internal narrator, which you've got and I've got, we've talked about that in other videos, that internal narrator sits up on the judge's podium and has a gavel and is critical and judgmental while that person is talking. When we're listening to argue, we have a lot higher levels of norepinephrine, which is adrenaline affecting our brain. We have a lot higher levels of dopamine, which is interesting. That's the neurochemical that makes us want to complete things. We have higher levels of cortisol as well. Cortisol is the fear hormone, also the stress hormone. You know that stress is fear. So don't use the word stress anymore. Use the word fear. It'll save it. It'll save you. It's amazing how effective that is if you know that. So with those higher levels of norepinephrine and cortisol and dopamine, when we are listening to argue, we have a feeling of invincibility. That person needs to be conquered. By the way, it's the same in men and women that have been tested. This is not gender-based. We all feel this, and we all have this kind of thing happen. When we're listening to argue, we tend to make a lot of statements. If we ask questions at all, they are prosecutorial in nature, trying to trap somebody. And we're looking for confirmation about what we already think is true. And here's a fun kicker. When we're listening to argue, we make about 10 times as many statements as we ask questions. When we count up the words, 10 times as many words that are making statements as when asking questions. We start with the assumption, you're wrong, you have something to learn. That's listening to argue. You might be familiar with that. What if we listen to understand? Well, we start with a different assumption. Our first assumption is that I have something to learn. If I'm truly listening to understand as a leader, I start by believing I'm missing something. I've got something to learn here. When I start with that assumption, I have higher levels of adrenaline, both norepinephrine and epinephrine, that affects the brain and the body, so we feel a sense of excitement. We have also high levels of dopamine, But we don't have any high levels of cortisol. It's instead replaced by higher levels of oxytocin. Oxytocin is that neurochemical that helps us glue together, look forward to, and enjoy other people. And dogs and horses as well, okay? And it leaves us this adrenaline, dopamine, oxytocin. It leaves us with this heightened sense of bonding with other people and courage together to accomplish something. Really different when we listen to understand. And we are actually looking for something, keeping track of things we've never heard before, compared to listening to argue when we're keeping track of things we already know and going, yep, I knew that, I knew that, I knew that, whether they say it or whether they don't say it. In this case, listening to understand, we're trying to look for something new. And then when we find something new, we lean into it and we will likely tell that person we're listening to, I never knew that. That's new to me. Tell me more. And we ask a lot of questions. If you want to get really good at listening to understand, we've watched people who are excellent at this and listened to them, and we found out how they actually do it. How do they? What are some of the tricks that they actually use? Well, of course, they have to start with the assumption that I have something to learn. I don't know everything. I have something to learn. They begin by managing their emotions. They're very well aware of that threat response that happens, and they manage that, and they've taught themselves, oh, this feels like a threat because that person disagrees with me. How can I turn it into a reward and go toward it? Well, the way I get reward is because I'm going to discover something here that could change the way I lead. That could change the way I experience a project or a person or a team or a tool. If I can just lean in, there's a treasure here. They actually manage their emotions and tip them away from the threat response toward the reward response. It's difficult for us to listen sometimes, and our emotions get in the way when we are an expert in something. And you're likely an expert in something. And when someone disagrees with you, you'll find yourself flaring a little bit. It can be difficult for us to listen when somebody has a really obnoxious, strong personality. And it can be difficult for us to listen when somebody is in themselves not willing to listen. But we have to manage those emotions. And then we get curious by starting with the assumption, I've got something to learn. Or maybe another version of that is, I think I'm missing something here. And we're very careful to not set out to change people's minds. In fact, we tell ourselves, I'm not trying to change their mind. It's not one of my goals. I'm not going to do that here. My goal is to change my mind. What do I not know? Then if we're going to listen to understand, we get quite good at asking very good questions. Like, what was your experience? What did you learn? What did you wish you would have learned that you didn't? What was that like for you? Can you tell me some more about that? Can you help me understand? And questions like that. And when those are fueled by genuine, respectful curiosity, then we have two parts of our brain that are going in tandem at very high levels. Genuine, respectful curiosity enables us to dive into emotional words when we hear them. When people use words that are emotionally laden, we lean into them instead of feeling threatened by them. Can you tell me some more about that? We dive into soft words like always and never. Those are soft words. We'll dive in. Tell me more. Is it always or is it usually? Is there another way of saying that? We ask questions around lonely numbers as well. When someone presents a number just by itself, there was 1,000 of those, they might say. Well, was there actually 1,000 or was there 950? And put that next to some other numbers. Like, what did it used to be? Or what did you expect it to be? Well, I expected it to be 500 and it was 1,000. I expected it to be 5,000 and it was 1,000. So that gives you perspective. Dive in to lonely numbers, dive into emotional words, and be motivated by a genuine, respectful curiosity. Here's the beauty of it all. When you and I listen to understand, we are constantly discovering things that change us, change our leadership, change how we view threats so that they become opportunities, and enable us to pounce on those opportunities much more quickly. Folks who have high levels of curiosity are very, very different from folks who have to always be right. So there's a thought for you. This was a little bit longer video than what we normally have, kind of a complicated issue, but let me suggest to you that you dive in and pay attention to, am I listening to understand or am I listening to argue? Hey, if this was helpful for you, you know the drill. Hit that like button, subscribe so you find out when these come out. Hit the bell because that will tell YouTube that you actually really do want to know when things are coming out from us, and that way you'll be alerted for the next one. Thanks for spending a little time with me. I'm going to spend a little bit of time with this scotch right now, and it's not a lot of it, so it won't take very long. Have a great day.